So we look now the content to observe pleasure. Not that it should not exist or should exist. What would you do without pleasure? What would not do without pleasure? Just to observe. That very observation brings its own peculiar discipline. You understand? The word discipline means to learn, not what we have made it into, which is to conform, suppress, identify, and drill oneself into a particular pattern. That is generally what is understood by the word discipline. The root meaning of that word, discipline, means to learn. Discipulo. It comes from that, disciple. Learn from the master. Here there is no master, we are learning. So, to observe without the observer brings its own order. You understand? Order means discipline. So, we are observing this thing called pleasure. So we are asking why man, throughout the world, at whatever level of society, class he may be, this is one thing he is pursuing. In the name of God, in the name of religion, in the name of politics, in the pleasure, with which goes power, position, prestige, and all the rest of it. Why? You understand? Why are you, as a human being, representing the world, which you are, why are you pursuing pleasure? Observe it, not right or wrong. Why is there this demand? You understand, when you go to church, when you go to a temple, it's another form of pleasure. Sexual pleasure, the pleasure of possession, the pleasure of denial, the pleasure of austerity, the pleasure of abundance, the pleasure of possession, the pleasure of detachment, the pleasure of achievement, the pleasure of renunciation, the pleasure of completely controlling your body. This immense structure of pleasure is one of the factors of our consciousness. Perhaps it may be one of the major factors. So why? You understand? You can't answer, not a verbal answer, observing this fact of pleasure. Why, we are asking, man has pursued it upon millions of years, which is you. Knowledge is a great factor of pleasure. The pleasure of having read great many books, all the information, able to talk about it, inform people, you follow? The whole pleasure of knowledge. Why? Observe it, please, in yourself. Why you, as a human being, pursue this pleasure. And what is pleasure? You understand? There's different kinds. of pleasure. The pleasure of sensation, biological, organic sensation. There is the pleasure, psychological pleasures, and the pleasure of thinking very clearly. And what is this pleasure? Is joy that thing which comes uninvited? Is that joy pleasure? You're wandering by yourself, if you ever do in a wood or walk along, and suddenly, without your any invitation, without seeking it, that's that peculiar sense of ecstasy, joy. That is wholly different from pleasure. But thought recognizes that joy as an extraordinary state, then remembers that state, please follow this, remembers that state and wants more of it. So pleasure is the movement of thought. I wonder if you see it. Huh, Ben? I have had a pleasure of a good meal, and I remember it, and I say to myself, I must have it tomorrow. The pleasure of domination, pleasure of having power over others. All that is the movement of thought over an incident which has happened and stored up as memory. And the movement of that is pleasure. So joy is entirely different from pleasure. Moment you remember that joy, then it becomes pleasure. And enjoyment. When you see a mountain, listen to the running waters, or see a green field and a lonely tree in a field, there is a delight. There is a sense of, fullness, appreciation of this vastness of this marvelous earth. Again, that feeling of enjoyment is taken over by thought and pursued. Therefore, that becomes pleasure. Is this clear? So, pleasure is the movement of thought in time. And we are conditioned to that. We seek enlightenment, a religious life, basically because it will give ultimate pleasure. Right? So pleasure is one of our basic principles in life, which is the pursuit of it. Not seeing the immense importance of seeing something extraordinary and not storing it. You understand? I wonder. This is, please, if I may point out to you again, this is very important. Because the brain is recording all the time. Recording every incident, every happening, every experience, it's like a computer, storing. Because in that storage there is great security. If there is no storing up, you are lost. So the brain needs security to function safely, intelligently, actively, efficiently. And so the brain stores up. As it stores up to act skillfully in the mechanical world, so brain stores up memory, knowledge as a means of its own security, which is obvious.